Welcome to the third of 5 videos from the Roman Army 2021 UofW lecture on From Estate to Retirement. I thought I was talking about pay in the last one, but I was the wrong slide. So this set is definitely on what the soldiers were paid and a little bit on what it cost, to have the soldiers and everything. Okay, so soldiers' pay, and this is pay during the imperial era. So when we have from Augustus makes pay a regular part of their experience. Okay, pay and costs, got to pay the soldiers, and and we can see how it changed over time as well. Now I'm drawing on. There's been lots of work on this, how much soldiers are paid, including by Speidel and Alston. Some variations, some key issues include, a lot of it's focused on auxiliaries and legionaries and how much were auxiliaries paid and how does it compare to what legionaries were paid. And then tied up with discussions of their relative worth and social position. So these are all part of this discussion. And, Praetorians, elite soldiers in terms of status, and some would argue because of their worth, get paid more. But there are other things as well. And some people looked at this in late antiquity too, I should say. So issues, one of the general views is that the legionaries were paid more. One ratio gives it 5 to 6. So if auxiliaries were paid, say in contemporary money, $5, legionaries would get paid $6, for instance. There does not seem to have been pay equity. It does seem I am of the opinion, follow other good work, that legionaries are paid a bit better. One other question, is this a living wage? Probably, especially if they have dependents, although it's variable. Now, we have talked a bit about clothing and supplies and stuff, and there were deductions from pay, just as, you get your paycheck and lots of money goes away to lots of things. Well, some of their money would be deducted for food and clothing. There does seem to have been a lot of centralization of all this, a lot of attempt to control and make it happen or whatever. So we've talked a bit about the standard, which had this. Oh yes, here's my pinwheel guy. Okay, he's got a standard. Okay, and have looked into its position as a means of communication, as a sacred thing attached to certain units or regiments, but also, again, these are the guys who are often responsible for, depending on which kind of standard it was, the unit's finances. So would keep track of some of this. We know that a significant part of state resources went towards paying the soldiers, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the next section. Cavalry obviously cost more because of the horses and the food that they would need in addition to whatever. Now, there were different pay grades. I had 3, but sort of there's a bit more, kind of varies. So there's basic pay, and then you might get paid into half if you're given some extra responsibilities. You might even get double pay. And I think there may even be hints at triple pay, but I might be misremembering. There are slight variations. There are highest ranking officers get paid, but some of the elite soldiers, I say elite in terms of their status, so the generals, etc., a lot of them, they're just wealthy because of whatever, family wealth and whatever. So there are also various points when pay was increased. We know Augustus obviously sort of kicked things off in many ways. Domitian increased pay, but then there was no pay raised for, 120 years. Timius Severus raised pay, and then Maximinus Thrax a few decades later raised pay again. Now, soldiers, unlike us, or at least me, I think most of the jobs I've held, Tim Hortons and where else did I pay? At a day camp and lifeguard, and I worked at a butcher. Some of the money was, anyway, it was often every 2 weeks. Okay. So it was definitely not like that for soldiers. Usually paid their stipendia, it was plural, stipendium singular. They got 3 stipendia over the course of the year. So 3 big, payments. January 1st, May 1st, and September 1st. To give you a sense, though, of just how much it varied from place to place and, from rank to rank and time to time. So this is in sesterces, Roman currency. There's a few different Roman currencies. If If you see during the reign of Caracalla, to show you, how much pay might fluctuate. Again, Romans, it was not a fair, equal, balanced society. So a centurion, a reasonably high-ranking non-commissioned officer in the military, so to speak, might make 13,500 sestertii, okay, is their pay stipendia, whereas a centurion of the first cohort might make 27,000, okay, so almost twice as much money, okay, so sestertii. And then if you are a primus pilus, which is the highest ranking centurion in the legion, you might make 54,000, another triple the amount, and even higher briefly under Maximinus Thrax. The money's worth and other issues are at play there as well. As far as your ordinary soldiers, though, so we're talking about Pullo and Polion, who were both legionaries. Again, Aemilianus, not necessarily off in the 4th century, but if Pullo had made it to 27 BCE, okay, was still going, was still getting paid, was still a soldier. It's a big if. He could have been making 300 sestertii in each payment and stipendium. It was increased to 400 under Domitian, and then a bigger jump, Septimius Severus. So when Polion was around, up to 800, and Caracalla increased again to 1,200, and then Maximinus Thrax, again, he's spending big money. He didn't last long. In late antiquity, so 300 CE, the unit of currency used had changed a bit. The Romans, I know I've been using CE throughout. I thought I caught all these, but obviously I didn't. They changed. Yeah, there were some changes in currency. They implemented, we talked a bit about Annona Militaris. It's this military supply system, kind of centralized and whatever. But Aemilianus would have been paid 12,000 denarii probably per year, per annum. Here you can see another pay scales between, here drawing on Spidal again, run heavily on his work, a couple different works, an earlier essay and then a later one. Here you can see during the reign of Severus, so during one pay period, one of these 3 pay periods, stipendium, sestertii is the currency that they were paid in. You can see in the previous one we looked at differences for low-ranking legionaries and then centurions, and here you can see how it varies from at 1 year, say 197-ish, so it's probably a bit later, how it varied between auxiliaries, the vigiles, often Rome, the praetorians, and legions. So a soldier, an ordinary soldier in the praetorians, a low-ranking one, might make 2,000 sestertii per stipendium, and compare that to what a vigiles might make 500, so a quarter of that pay. The same for certain soldiers in the auxiliaries. So just an ordinary infantry soldier in the auxiliaries might make 500 as well. If you are in a mounted cohort, so if infantry cavalry mix, you might make 600. If you are auxiliary, you might make 700. But again, there's deductions, and auxiliaries in the cavalry got to pay for their horses and stuff as well. And then if you're an officer, you get paid more again, although it varies. And over in the legions, you can see, again, the sort of 5 to 6 ratio, 600 sestertii for a ordinary legionary, a little bit more for cavalry, again, because, it costs a bit more, so it looks like better pay, but there's also some other things to bear in mind. Centurions get paid a lot, so it's a big jump. So they're really maintaining these divisions, class divisions and otherwise, that you can see there. Just to finish off the payment part, it's hard to say because people always want to know, how can you translate that into modern money, and it doesn't work that way. It's very difficult to go from one currency to another, especially across, however many years, 2,000 years. I know there's some good websites you can compare, dollars, US dollars in like 1820 to modern US dollars, whatever, which is kind of fun. But it's difficult in this context. And one thing you can do is try to look at prices of goods and compare with how much people were paid. And actually, a reasonable illustration of this is something called Diocletian's Price Edict. Here's a picture that shows some of it. So here now we're dealing in sestertii and also denarii. 1 denarius is more than sestertii, so 4 sestertii make 1 denarii. The price edict was implemented as sort of as a one-off attempt to sort of rein in cost inflation and bring things under control and control how things were prices and stuff. And assuming it gives you a reasonable snapshot of things, it does give you a sense of how much certain goods cost and how much certain people get paid. So there's a wealth of information. The problem is, we don't know how long it was implemented for, and nevertheless, it's still pretty useful. So if you want to know more, go check out Diocletian's price edict. So obviously, paying soldiers costs a lot of money. The military costs a lot of money. The Romans spent lots of money on their soldiers and their equipment and waging war, etc. So there were all sorts of different expenses. So pay was only part of it, but there were other ones too. So there were often, there could be one-time expenses if you're preparing for a particular conflict. Maybe you need to raise a whole bunch of additional new troops at once, and then they would be on the record after that. But there were also, of course, lots of regular expenses besides the salaries that we've talked about. We talked about personnel, animals. So one, by some reckoning, a horse might last 4 years, and depending how many horses were used in the cavalry, you might need 30 to 40,000 horses a year. Well, most horses were private, so there's all this money that comes out of your pay to pay for them. And there's other animals too, but horses are the big one. Then there's supplies for the horse, there's supplies for you, there's all the weapons, there's the armor, there's the clothing. There are also other costs. There's these donatives, which are given out, these big lump sum payments. It wasn't this class, it was a different class. That's about pensions. Well, we're getting to retire. There is no pension, but you do get these lump sum payments at various points, and when you retire, a lump sum possibly. It's possible there was some financial compensation for illness, and then there's money for other things that take place involving the military. So there's their public duties, okay, their costs for doing certain things. And then if you think about, I've only touched on some of the religious roles of soldiers, but all the cults and festivals, the sacrifices, the animals to be sacrificed, the incense, the wine, and even when we shift to Christianity and late antiquity, those also cost money as well. So to give you a sense of just the vast scale of costs, so this is now later, okay, this is 300 CE, so late antiquity. This is Warren Treadgold, very interesting. It's done lots of interesting work on sort of facts and figures, stats from late antiquity and Byzantium in terms of the military. So here's are some of his guesstimates for expenses for the military, and here, because of the time, we're dealing in the solidus. So just as 4 sestertii make 1 denarii, 1,000 denarii is 1 solidus. So if you think about the soldiers getting paid, some of them are being paid, okay, they're making paid 500 sestertii per every few months, and then another whatever, and here you see where this fits in terms of big expenses, at least in this 1 year. So by his reckoning, soldiers, assuming there were 311,000 soldiers, his calculations, there were nearly 5 million solidi spent in 1 year. And then, I've hardly mentioned the fleet and the Navy, but nearly 500,000 solidi spent on the Navy, nearly 1.5 million solidi on uniforms and arms, okay, their production and maintenance, 130,000 on fodder and horses, and then 500,000 on campaigns and other expenses. And then there's the bureaucracy, all these officials doing all the paperwork and sorting various things, maybe 1 million solidi for them, and then other non-military expenses. I think you could probably include some of the religious stuff there, 800,000, which brings us to nearly 9.5 million solidi a year. The military was, by most reckoning, everyone agrees the military was by far the biggest expense the state had to pay. One thing, possibly half of all income was directed towards the military, possibly much more than that, depending on time and location. Anyway, so there's an introduction to pay and expenses in the military.